My name is Richard Ferrer, and I can say I am cloud hired.
That yes, come and join and get cloud hired. I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
Hey, Go Cloud Architect family. I'm cloud hired.
So I'm cloud hired, guys.
So I'll just say I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired thanks to Go Cloud Architects.
It worked for me, and now I'm cloud hired. Because of Google Architect program, I am cloud hired. See!
I am cloud hired. Thank you, Mike and the GlowCloud team.
Welcome, everyone. This is Mike Gibbs, and I am here to help you build your security career. Maybe you have a goal of becoming a cloud security architect, a cybersecurity architect, or any kind of security architects. Honestly, they're almost all the same, and I'll discuss those differences between you. Maybe you've got a goal to work in any kind of cybersecurity career. Well, if so, ask me, and I will do anything I can to help you get there. I remember 25 years ago when I started my technology career, I had no idea where to go. And ultimately, I spoke to a bunch of friends who had no idea where to go either. And we all spent time learning things that weren't related to our job. Then when it came time to getting hired, we didn't have the skills for the job. So I started looking for what I needed to do. I found a couple of great mentors. They told me exactly the skills that I need. And poof, 6 months later, I got my first job in tech as a senior network engineer. 3 months later, I was a lead network architect. 2 years later, I was a principal architect. And all of you can do the same thing if you know exactly how to get there and you can laser focus on your goals. So bring me any questions you can about what does a security architect do, or how to become a security architect, or what are the security architect skills, or anything related to this career. And if it's not security architecture and it's enterprise architecture or AI architecture or cloud architecture you're curious about, please feel free to ask questions about that as well. So thank you so much. So I wanted to tell you about a few things we have that I'm really excited about before we actually begin today, and most of them are free, so I thought I would tell you about it. Tonight, we have a security architect webinar, and we're going to discuss how to become a security architect. We'll talk about everything you do as a security architect, all the skills you'll need as a security architect to get your first job, and I'll even tell you how to stand out and get ahead so you can get hired as a security architect. And this webinar is completely free. Tyron from my team will drop that in the chat box, and you can register for it that way. It's also in the description of our video as well. So hope to see so many of you tonight on the completely free security architect webinar. It's on Zoom, so you can bring any security architecture questions you want, career related, or any architect career questions for that matter, and I'll happily answer them, including enterprise architect careers or cloud architect careers or others. I also wanted to tell you that we have our completely free cybersecurity fundamentals boot camp that we're going to be running for the next 5 weeks on Zoom. And it starts next week. So please register. It's completely free, and share with others so they can register. It's completely free live training on Zoom. And I wanted to let everybody know that we have 45% off for fall savings. So if you want to train with Go Cloud Careers and you've determined you want to, when you want to become an architect or any kind of architect, like an enterprise architect or cloud architect, and you want to train with us, everything is 45% off now. So please take advantage of that. At this point, if there's any questions, please bring your questions to the chat box so I know exactly how to answer them. And don't be shy. And Tyron from my team, are there any questions in the chat box yet? Cloud Doctor, always good to see you. So glad to be here and be able to ask questions. I'm thrilled you keep coming. How can someone demonstrate their ability to design a scalable, cost-efficient, secure solution if they lack direct cloud architecture experience? It's a great question. So there's a big difference between competency and years of experience. And that's the thing that employers are looking for, thankfully, is employers are looking for competency. So I can easily assess your skills from a competency perspective. And it's very easy to demonstrate that you understand architecture. And truth be told, they assess physicians' competency the same way. And I can remember, being a nurse practitioner, getting my first job in healthcare, and they assess competency the same way. And what they do is they give you a situation and see what you do. So, for example, and I'll tell you one of the most common reasons people fail a security architect interview, and I'll tell you what to do on the security architect interview instead to actually show them that you understand security architecture. So many times we ask a candidate, tell me how to design a secure multi-cloud architecture. And you know what someone starts talking about? The first thing they talk about is which tools we need. Now, that person shows us that they have no idea what architecture even is. So here's the different response that an architect would do to do their job. And if I was on an interview and I gave a security architect or cloud security architect an interview, I'm going to give them that same a question just like that. And the expectation of an answer realistically should be, instead of just going straight to a tool, the person should say, well, the first thing we need to do is start asking these questions. So could you give me some information about this? Could you give me some information about this? Could you give me some information on that? And that, even if they say just, you make an assessment and go, then tell them what your assumptions are. But I would start with that. Now, once you actually start getting information and, then you start understanding, for an example, what the organization has, its assets, its traffic flows, the way an organization does business, for example, then you can start mapping out trust boundaries, and you can start thinking about data flows, and you can start thinking about the various trade-offs of placing certain things in your security posture one place or another. But you can absolutely describe that to them. So you start by proving it by asking questions and instead of coming up straight with an engineering solution, because we architects know there's never a best anything. That everything it sells has trade-offs. So that's the first thing that you do, is you make it clear and you prove your architecture thinking. Now, somewhere along the line, when you communicate to someone, you have to be able to communicate risk. And, you can't communicate risk by learning how to build stuff. You have to be able to look at that organization and you be able to calculate that risk, and you need to be able to show the C-suite what that risk is and the potential risk, the potential impact to that business if that risk was realized. You need to quantify that risk and even also qualify the risk. So, what happens if that organization is down for 2 hours? And what if that organization does $1 million of revenue and they're down for 2 hours? Well, clearly they've lost at least $120 million of revenue. But on top of that, what's going to happen with the brand, for example? Which customers don't go back to the same company because they were down that one time? So there's so many things that go into the calculation. That's what we think to do as architects. So be able to communicate risk to the business to get the business to want to be able to impact it proves to us that you actually understand. So if a candidate walks in, for example, and they start talking about, configuring the firewall or just the firewall, and they can't talk about any kind of threat modeling and various trade-offs, and, if they can't show how you could follow a structured threat modeling model and how an organization would use that, we can't really hire the person. So that's how you do it. You prove that you can do the job, and when you're there, can you explain a zero trust architecture and truly make it relevant for the executive team and the technical team? Those are the kind of things that prove you can do the job. So that's what I would suggest. And that's what happens. And that's how you do it on that first interview. They're going to ask you questions to gauge your competency. And how you answer the questions is really everything. It's kind of like a math problem you took in college where they were teaching calculus or whatever, and they wanted you to show your work, because they wanted to see the logic that you flowed along the way and see where your errors were along the way. Well, this is that same kind of thing. We need to be able to explain why we chose option A versus option B. So it'll be pretty easy to demonstrate. And again, Cloud Doctor, when we're going to be looking at that candidate that we go to interview on that interview, We have to ask ourselves, and we do this every single time as hiring managers, can I put this person in front of the C-suite? Do they know how to communicate to the C-suite? Could this person sell a $50 million security solution? Because even if we're not in sales, if we can't convince the organization to follow our security posture and they get hacked, it's because we couldn't sell it to them as security architects. So that sales becomes very critical if we want to be able to protect things. Cloud Doctor, I learned this a long time ago. Many years ago, I put a patient on a medication that was very critical for them to stay alive for the next, few years. And the patient didn't want to take the medication. And, I had brought in a more senior physician at the time to try to convince the patient to take the medication. And the physician said, basically sold the patient into it. And he walked in and handed me a Dale Carnegie book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And the physician literally said to me, I was young at the time, this is 30 years ago, you've got to learn to sell to be able to make any meaningful change, whether it's in someone's life, whether it's here, whether it's there. So sales are going to be critical. And they'll be assessing your sales skills and your communication skills and the way you act on your interview. And that's going to be a big part of it. Great question, Cloud Doctor. Please feel free to ask more. Flying kites. Is there a big difference between cloud security and cybersecurity from an architect perspective? Actually, no. So here's the thing. When I talk security architecture, we have to think about securing everything. So if we purely look at security architecture, let's think about what that is. That's risk management, understanding an organization's assets, calculating its risk, coming up with risk mitigation plans. And it could be to mitigate the risk, to transfer the risk to an insurance company, what have you. So think about risk management as one of those domains we always have as a security architect. And another domain that we typically have as a security architect is network security, for example. So there's a lot of things that we can do on the network, for example, things like VLANs and access control lists and firewalls and IDS, IPS systems, for example. So in any architecture, we're going to need this, but let's just keep it to cloud. Let's keep it to security for a second. There'll be physical security. Where do we keep our locks? How do we keep our data center locked? How do we talk about people coming in and out of the building and who can access things, for example, would be a part of it. There'll be some element of application security. And that application security things like when the application is coded, some software development, some tests like static and dynamic code tests, for example, things like input validation, for example, to help prevent SQL type injection attacks. So there'll be certain things that go into application security that every organization is going to need. And then there'll be things that are identity and access management related that every architecture in the world is going to need, whether that's a context-aware IA system or something simple like a role-based system, whether it's the authentication methods that I choose to determine what you're using, or using a fingerprint, an eye, a token, what have you, and what are the trade-offs between these things. All of that is going to be the same. And when we start thinking of the infrastructure, which is going to be next, servers, where all our virtual machines are running, where our Kubernetes environment is running, the infrastructure of it all, the routers, the switches, the servers, what have you, that powers everything. In today's world, a security architect is working on it. And truthfully, whether it's a public cloud or a private cloud, a security architect is working on all of these things if they're skilled, especially in cloud security. And quite frankly, if a security architect doesn't know cloud security at this point, they're not going to be very, very capable in the world, given the workloads that are on the cloud. So the security architect needs to understand the cloud, because maybe a customer is in a VMware cloud, or a Nutanix cloud, or an OpenStack private cloud, or maybe they're on Oracle and AWS. So, that infrastructure, all that stuff, the servers, the workstation, servers, the storage, those types of things, the net router switches, all that's going to be an infrastructure part of it, which of course we architects are responsible for. So when you start looking at all of it, that is the security architecture. It's the end, and it includes things like security policies, incident response procedures, how we would structure management and operations, and all that stuff comes under our domain to design that. So it doesn't matter. Many years ago, they called it cybersecurity, and then they call it InfoSec because it was only focusing on information security. And that's fine as an engineer to only focus on the information security, but let's be real. If, for example, we don't train our people on what not to do, and somebody, flatters the receptionist and convinces that receptionist to give them some extra information they're not supposed to. Social engineering, for example, is something that kind of is an example of an attack like that. And if we don't take care of those things, it's not going to work anyway. And if people can just walk in the building and plug in whatever they want, it's not going to work anyway. So it all falls into security right now. And that way, whether we call it security or whether we call it cybersecurity or we call it cloud security, to me, it's just all security. And if you've got all those same skills that you'll need in all these roles, you can have a security architect job, a cloud security architect job anywhere. And there's such a critical shortage of that role. So, it doesn't matter, but lots of terms get thrown around. And that's okay. Well, I prefer a single term, but that's kind of the way the world is. The marketing people at AWS determine their virtual machines or EC2 instance. Somebody at Google determines their virtual machines or compute engine instance. Oracle calls it a virtual machine like it is. Azure calls it an Azure virtual machine. So lots of marketing terms that are out there, but it's all the same. Security, security, security. Great question there, Flying Kites. The pain. You don't really have a question, but you're getting a bachelor's degree in cloud computing while working on projects in your free time. Nearly every job I see on LinkedIn for cloud is architect. Well, we are in a new world. And the pain, I'll let you know what I mean by the new world. AI is a disruptive technology that changes everything. So about 2 years ago, I had mentioned a couple of things to people that were out there. You can see videos, you can see articles that I wrote in big publications that are on are attached to our website. And when I say big publications, in places like Forbes and CIO Magazine and others where I've written many articles for, I had said that people really should get out of engineering and they needed to do one of two things. They needed to move into a role that was AI proof. And an AI proof role was a security architect role, a cloud architect role, an AI architect role, an enterprise architect role, a sales engineer role, a sales executive role, a C-suite executive role. And when I said is also, please get out of engineering. There's going to be massive engineering layoffs. I love cloud engineers. I love engineers of all kinds. They make things reality, but I said they need to get out of it. And if they want to stay in engineering, they need to be in the top 25% of the people that are out there. And why did I say this? And why is most of the jobs going to be architects? Because what do engineers do? A software engineer writes code. AI can write code. It's not perfect right now, but there's about $1 trillion being added by the biggest technology companies in the world. 2 to 5 years from now, or 5 years from now, AI will probably rewrite all its code. So what you're seeing is those back-end jobs where they were people that were more hands-on, like an engineer. Someone that would write a Python script, for example, AI can do that. Someone that would write a bash shell script in Linux, AI can do that. Someone that used to install the operating systems on bare metal, for the most part, were in cloud, and that kind of stuff is kind of normal. So what you've been seeing, which is what I talked about a long time ago, was a big engineering layoff perspective. And companies are now hiring for architects because we architects are there to generate revenue. And what do I mean by this? There are revenue producers and there are cost consumers. A sales rep that sells something for a company is bringing in money. When the sales rep at Cisco goes out with a solutions architect at Cisco and sells a $500 million solution to a global bank, that solutions architect, that sales engineer, that sales rep brought money in. So those people, anytime, and you can see every time there's a big layoff in tech, they lay off 10,000 people and they hire more solutions architects, more sales reps, and more sales engineers the very next day. So it's because we're typically revenue producing if we work at a vendor. Now, if we work at the end client and you are working as the cloud architect, what is your position? You are not a hands-on engineer. You won't learn anything about it by learning engineering whatsoever. You're now a strategist. So you're going to work with an organization and help that organization create a strategy to give them a competitive advantage in business. And what is that architect then? That architect is a hybrid of two people. And I'll show you what I actually mean by that. I'll map it out for you because your question is great. And I want you to understand why you're seeing these big demands for architects. Even at the same time, you're noticing that there's a lot of engineering layoffs that are going on in the back end, which is why you don't see many jobs posted for engineers either right now. So here's the reason why. And let's talk, and I'm also going to talk about the skills that you actually need. So let's say you're working at a company and you're here as the architect. What you're typically doing is the following, and it's not, and I'm going to show you why it's different than other jobs. So your job is to start with the executives, and I'll show you why. When you start with the executives, what you're trying to find out is where is that business going? And why are you doing this? Because you are a strategist to help that business get to the next level. Maybe they're an e-commerce provider and you're going to design an AI recommendation engine. So when a customer goes to that website, the recommendation engine kind of recommends things to the people on the website and they buy more. But the first step of what we need to do for any kind of architect is figure out what the executives want to do. So we know what our measure of success is, and we also know what we're trying to design for. If we don't know this, we can't design anything. So at this point, what we're doing here is we're speaking with some executives to figure out where they're trying to take their business. Now, the next thing that we have to do here as architects, and let me show you why this is such a special skill set. So the next thing that we have to figure out is the business architecture. And the business architecture is how that company operates. Now, when clients call an architect, they don't call them to build something. They call us to create a new way for their business to operate. So maybe they were a store like a video store, and they hold videotapes, and they came to their cloud architect to say, is there a way that we could distribute content over the internet instead of mailing DVDs back and forth to each other like Netflix did? That changes the business architecture, the way the business worked, and then typically the way things are done. And I use Netflix as an example of something like that would use a cloud architecture. But there are lots of clients that did that. They changed the way they do business. So first thing for us is figure out, what we're trying to do. Then the key is figure out also who the stakeholders that we need to speak to. That's where we start as architects. Then we have to figure out the business architecture. That's things like a value stream, which I don't expect you to be aware of right now. And that's why we do enterprise architecture training. That's things like the business capabilities and mapping out of business capabilities, what have you. And now these are all executive skills I'm talking about right here. So this kind of thing here demands communication skills, leadership skills, strategy skills, executive presence, so relevance, and other things. And if you want to learn more about that, come to any webinar. I'll tell you exactly what they are. Now, once we understand what the business architecture is, as a rule, then we have to look at the other technologies and other things that they have. So what does that mean? It means we've now got to look at the other pieces of technology that are related to their business, which is going to be basically their data architecture. Who owns what? Where's the data have to flow? What are we doing to protect it? How are we using the data? What tools are we using with our data? The data architecture. Now, we'll also have to get involved with the organization's application architecture. Now, those are the applications and how they work and how they enable the employees to do their job or the customers to work with that organization. And then we have to design the technology architecture. Now, the technology architecture and the data architecture is a lot of that cloud architecture work we typically talk about. And the technology architecture is everything else. So it's the networking that gets you to the cloud. It's the networking in the cloud, because networking falls under things. It's your physical load balancers or your logical load balancers. It's your storage. It's your robotics that you could be using or whatever else is going on in your technology systems. And those are the other components. And we typically, as any kind of cloud architect or enterprise architect, work and lead with an architecture team to design these new things to make them better than they used to be. And then once we have to figure that out, what are we doing as any kind of architect? And I'm showing you this so you see why it's the hardest position to hire for, why everybody's screaming for us, and there's no supply of people out there, hence such the high pay. So after we have to come here, then we have to figure out what's going to go into the solution architecture. Now, the solution architecture is the exact technology that we typically use. So if over here we said we need 100,000 physical cores and 100 terabyte or 100 petabyte or 1 petabyte of DRAM for our system to run, and we know what our things are, then we solution architecture will be determining how many EC2 instances we would be, or what kind and how many compute engine instances we would use on Google. That's where we get to the actual modules of what we're designing architecture-wise. And then what do we typically have to do next? We have to typically come up with some kind of rollout. What's the plan going to be? How is it going to be installed? What kind of people do we need to install it? What is the sophistication of the people that need to install it? Do we do it in 1 phase, 2 phase, or 3 phases along the way? So that's the plan. And then the last part of what we're typically doing as architects is setting up a governance structure. So and this is going to be a governance structure for the implementation, a governance structure for change control, and all of this. So this is the majority of what we're doing in our role. Most of this is not technical. Keep that in the back of your mind. So that's typically why, because it's impossible to hire someone with these skills. Because you can't get them in a certification. You typically don't get them in a master's degree in cloud computing, because I've got a lot of people graduated with bachelor's and master's degrees in cloud computing, and I've trained them, and a year later, they're now working as cloud architects, solutions architects all over, and they're doing great. But that's why most of the jobs you're seeing as architects, because we're typically revenue producing people, because we're either selling a product, like an AWS solutions architect is selling you AWS services, bringing money into AWS. So no matter what the economy is, they need more people to sell, because we bring money in. Or you're working for the end client and you're creating strategies to help them operate more efficiently, suck out expenses that they have, improve the productivity of the people they have. Those are more of what we do here, and they're more executive skills. So that's why there's so many architect positions, because technology can be such a good competitive advantage, but nobody can actually fill them. So you'll see them posted for a long time, at least 60 days minimum on average to fill an architecture position. Although there's architecture positions that go unfilled for 9 months or more, not because they don't get a lot of applicants, but because they can't find anybody that knows how to do architecture. Why don't you come to the architect webinar tonight? It's free, we can talk, we can meet, and it's live on Zoom. These are great questions you're bringing in. And please feel free to ask more. It's not as easy as making it sound. What about a complex organization like Mercedes-Benz or Tesla? They're a lot smaller than any organization, Chris, that I ever worked with in my organization, to be fair. I've worked with some of the largest government systems in the world for their healthcare. I worked with Bank of America as an architect in really big organizations. And it's exactly what we do. Now, Chris, I got to tell you, in any architecture role, I lead a team of 15 to basically 50 people. And it takes me 6 to 9 months to actually do what we're saying. That's really what we do. Now, but I mean, it takes 6 to 12 months. And it takes a whole lot of executive skills in that 6 to 12 months, but it's like anything else. You've got to be able to summarize it. I mean, it takes me 1,000 hours to teach this role, because that's what it really takes to be good at it. But even in a complex organization, that's what we have to do. Now, what do we do more of in a complex organization? Well, I'll actually map that out for you, because these are really good questions. And it is that easy, even in a big organization. So, but let's talk about where it gets complicated if people don't do this. So I'll extrapolate on what I was actually referring to, because it's a good question and it's a fair question. If you start here, and let's say you just started with the executive, just for argument's sake. So you start out, let's say you're lucky and your executive sponsor is the CEO. Now, on that first meeting, you're going to ask that CEO, who else is involved in this project? Who are the key stakeholders that I should speak to? Now, as soon as you figure that one out, here's what happens. So now the CEO tells you that you should speak to Mehdi. And Mehdi is the chief financial officer, and you must speak with her. Now, at the same time, they say you need to speak to my chief financial, or Nikolaus. And he says, in addition to speaking to my chief financial officer, Nikolaos, you really have to speak to Theodoros. And after you speak with Theodoros, you need to speak with Yorgos. Sorry, I'm using Greek names today for some reason. Probably it's the names I'm most familiar with because of typically the people in my family. So we speak to these, and these are all the executives. And you know what happens when we speak to Maddie? Maddie says, you know what? You need to speak to these three people. These two people are the managers, and this one's the champion. So Maddie now tells you who you need to speak to. So this is Apostoli that you need to speak to. And after you speak to Apostoli, you need to speak to Evangelos. And after you speak to Evangelos, you have to speak to Vigali. Now, just this, we started here. And you know what happens when you speak to each of these? That will lend itself into another conversation. So this part of just communicating with the stakeholders is 50% of this job. And this, to be fair, could take 6 months with a team of 50 people, depending upon how global the organization is. So there is that. Now, in every step that I actually talked about, that is basically the same thing. And what I really talked about, and I use as an overview, was the TOGAF framework. Realistically speaking, start with the executives, figure out what you want to do, map out the business architecture, the data architecture, the technology architecture, which includes your security, go from that to create your solutions architectures, come up with your actual implementation plan and guidance and governance structure. But that could take a very long time. So 6 to 12 months, easy. And I've also worked on architectures that took 18 months with a team of 50 people. So it's kind of terrific. What would be a good part to become a security architect? So I'm not sure that I actually understand what you mean. What are the good parts of the job, perhaps? So Elvis, I'll work with that. And if I missed, and if I got your question wrong, please ask a different question. I'd love to see you here. Where are you from, by the way? I know a lot of nice, wonderful people named Elvis in Cameroon, but I'm always curious where people are from. So what I think are the best parts of being a security architect are, and I've loved the role, I spent many years in it, in the security, the network security kind of things, as you get to meet people, which I tend to love. You get to develop relationships, which I tend to love. You don't get your hands dirty, so we're not writing code and we're not touching the technology. So you're off of that treadmill of constantly learning how to understand, how to configure everything. We typically get paid at least double that, say, a security engineer would earn, at least. And typically speaking, the security architect, because it's a leadership position, because it's an executive position, is fairly easy to get to the C-suite. It's incredibly in-demand role, which equals high pay, because there's a shortage of people that can do it. And I think it's fun to help create a strategy to help an organization get better and to protect that organization from harm. But to me, I like protecting others from harm. Kind of goes in with my philosophy. I've always done it. I've always learned martial arts and other things and how to protect others. And I just love protecting things, whether it's people, whether it's animals, whether it's security. So it's kind of something that I just really do enjoy, is protecting organizations, its people, its customers from harm. So I think it's that. If you've got questions on skills, please let me know if I got the question wrong, or if I because it was a little hard to understand. But that's what I would say. That's the best part of the role. You get to meet people, you get to help people, and you get paid real well to do it. And it's always in demand. Great question. I hope I got the question wrong, right, Elvis? How technically deep should an enterprise architect be to gain developers' trust? Okay, so Panchi, so here's a question for you. Let's say you were the chief surgeon as a hospital. Who do you have to impress? The CEO, the patients, or the secretary? So, Panchi, your goal is not to gain developers' trust. And I'm going to tell you why that matters. Now, you have to be respected as a leader, but the developer's trust doesn't matter, because the developer doesn't sign the check. The C-suite signs the check. So Instead of worrying about what you need to be able to do to be worried about the developer's goals, you need to be worried about what your goals are. So if the developer doesn't love you, so what? If you can't sell your $1 billion architecture to the C-suite, then your architecture died. If you're working as a security architect and that organization needs $79 million of security work, and you don't have the business acumen and the sales skills to guide that security organization or to guide that company into adopting that security architecture, and they get hacked and go out of business and 80,000 people lose their job, that becomes your fault because you don't have those sales skills. So, and we have to take ownership of executives of our responsibility in things. So I wouldn't worry about the developer, because your job is not there as a developer. Your job is to be able to look at the C-suite's needs, to be able to identify the key stakeholders, to be able to identify what the stakeholders need, to negotiate between the stakeholders and what they actually need. And be able, because, you know, product might need something different than sales needs. So you're going to have to do some negotiation of that. Next thing you're going to have to do is you're going to have to create a team. And your team is going to be architects, not developers that you're going to be working with. You're going to need network architects to focus on networking, and data architects to focus on data, and AI architects to focus on the AI applications, and application architects to focus on the applications, not developers, applications architects that can help you with the strategy. Now, those application architects on your team that are technical architects, they may be going to the developers more often. And I'm not saying don't speak to the developers, but the developers' trust doesn't have anything to do with your future as an enterprise architect. If you can't influence the C-suite and the board, you can't do the job. Whether the developers like you or not, as the best cardiothoracic surgeon in the world does his or her secretary love them, it's irrelevant, because you're not a developer, you're not an engineer. And we always have to think about that. So the bigger question is, if you focus time on developing the developer's trust, you know what you're not going to have: the skills to influence the C-suite. So in anything, you've got a target, and I would tell you to focus on the executive's trust, because that's what matters. Because that developer can't write $1 billion purchase order, but the CEO can, the CFO can, and in many cases, I've done $1 billion plus architectures. Now, I don't know anything about software development, Panchi. I've been an enterprise architect for 25 years. I always bring an application architect. Now, I know probably 100 times more than any other enterprise architect about networking and security, because I did that stuff as a principal architect level or better for years. But I'm still not, as that enterprise architect, going to be focused on that level of networking or security. I have to bring them in there, because the developers are one piece of the equation, Panchi. You're going to have networking teams that you do need to have some respect from, not the developers, but you'll have networking people, you'll have security people, you'll have AI people, you'll have other big data people, you'll have voice people, you'll have video people in an organization, and all of them at the architect level, you need their respect, because they're going to be the people that are helping you create a strategy. And guess what the network architect is going to do? They're going to have some engineers that are going to help guide them on the more technical parts of the strategy while they focus. You're the security architect, you'll have some other people like from the IAM side to even help you. So that's the key. But the developers are probably the least important person in your world. Now, I'm not saying developers aren't important. The software developers make is absolutely incredible. The work they do changes the way we all live and play. So I love developers, but your job is to make somebody else happy, not the developers. And I want you to focus on your job. Because I can tell you, Panchi, I've seen people that focused on making the engineers happy and they lost their jobs. Where I've seen people that focused on making the executives happy go from $200,000 solutions architect roles to $500,000 or more real architect roles, heavy architect roles, enterprise architecture roles, executive architect roles. That's really what I want for you. Great question. Where should one maintain hands-on coding skills to stay credible? Panchi, I'm going to say what, if you have coding skills, I promise you, you're not going to be a credible architect. And here's the reason why. If you're focused on your coding skills, will you be able to focus on this? Because this is your job. Can you quantify an organization's risk and make a recommendation to them of mitigating the risk with the technical control, transferring the risk to, say, an insurance company, or doing a hybrid combination? Can you look at all of the organization's risks and prioritize which risks they need to actually mitigate first? For example, the answer is you need to be able to do that. Now, can you look at an organization's cost of capital, say their weighted average cost of capital, their blended capital cost between issuing, say, stock and then debt, and be able to look at that and say, well, you know what? Let's look at what it would cost to finance the organization's technology versus put them in the public cloud, or lease the organization's technology because there's too much debt on the balance sheet, and therefore we want to be able to run it as an operational expense to lease the technology, or should it go in a public cloud? Because you need to be able to do that. What I need you to be able to do is look at an organization's business capabilities, map out that organization's business capabilities, and figure out a plan to enhance them. Because that's your job as an enterprise architect. You're not going to get anywhere close to code. It's going to be that. You'll never be allowed to touch the technology in one of these jobs either. Now, at the same time, do you know what it takes to go to the board and convince the board they need to give you $1 billion? Because that $1 billion that you need for that AI recommendation engine, if designed properly, has an expected value of 3 times that. And do you know how to calculate that business case? That is your job. How to code? I have no idea how to code because I'm an enterprise architect. Now, the other thing, Panchi, I want you to think about is that 50% of all enterprise architects out there have never had a tech job in the past. 50%. So why is it that 50% of all working enterprise architects don't actually know how to code or didn't come from a tech background? Well, here's the reason why. Now, Panchi, knowing how to code is like knowing another language. That's great. Ogomilao poles glossas. I said I speak multiple languages in Greek. But the only thing is, if you spoke Greek, you could go to Greece and sell your architectures. But if you spoke Python, that has absolutely zero to do with your role because you're not coding, you're creating a strategy. So don't worry about how to code. And here's the reason. I actually have a slide that's really going to help map it out that I think will do. This one I actually pre-made a little while back. And it usually comes when people are worried about learning coding skills for an architecture job. And I want them to see why it won't help them at all. Let me just find one. Let's say it's an enterprise architect or a cloud architect. Here's the reason why. So if I look at what you really need from a skills perspective, let's start with the technology. None of it's related to coding. But I do need you to understand things about networking, things like which wide area network type should you use and why should you use it, IP addressing, subnetting, routing plans, those kind of things. I need you to figure out which applications can drive digital transformation. For example, how will a CRM system help them, or an ERP system, or a unified communications application? How is that going to impact their business? Now, how do they get integrated together? That you do need to know, but not how to code. Now, you'll need to know what kind of storage that organization needs: block storage, object storage, file storage, how to work around slow performance storage with RAID and other options. But what you won't need to know is how to code. Now, you'll need to know how to load balance between clouds, load balance between data centers, load balance between servers, load balance between containers, load balance between hard disks, load balance between CPU cores, load balance between GPUs and other things. But you don't need to know how to code. Now, you will need to how to design a zero trust architecture, for example, what goes into network security, but you will not need to code. Now, you will need to know how and what kind of compute to choose. When do you choose a VM, virtual machine, versus a container versus application virtualization? But coding has no bearing on that. Now, you will need to know how and why to design a data architecture and how to work with data warehouses and data lakes and data lakehouses, and what kind of data privacy technologies you might be using, tokenization, obfuscation, what have you, what kind of data encryption. But again, you won't need to code. There's no part of coding. You will need to know how to use AI to drive business transformation. But again, you won't code it. You will need to understand all the types of IAM, the hardware, the software, types of things that you could use along the way. But again, not how to code. Now, the other 75% of your job, and that's 25% of your job, is leading a technical team to get to these things, is being able to know how to create a new strategy to a business that you can convince the business, the C-suite, the COO, what have you, and the board to follow. So and that's why we teach business in our programs. Otherwise, I say get an MBA for the role. You will need to know how to communicate to the C-suite. For example, what does the chief financial officer care about, and how do you communicate those things? 50% of the job of any architect is stakeholder management, which is communication between stakeholders. And again, totally not related to coding. A lot of our job is eliciting information or getting information. Again, that has nothing related to code. Now, you will have to be able to influence the C-suite into spending money on your architecture as well as people and resources. If you can't, and then your security architecture ends up in a piece of paper that got thrown away. So there's no value to it unless you can sell it. You'll have to know a lot about business process optimization, the ability to walk in and command a room with executive presence, strong presentation skills, and the ability to drive change through an organization, what's necessary to change the culture, what have you. And why is that? Because, an enterprise architecture or a new technology rollout is not likely to be successful unless you can change the culture. In fact, Prosky's data was that we are 7 times more likely to be successful in our architectures with good trains management. That includes training people. That includes coming up with training curriculums. That includes getting stakeholder buy-in, whatever. So that's the job. So that's why I wouldn't worry about coding, because it has no part in any job as an architect, at least as an enterprise architect, and it'll keep you far away from the skills. Because, as you notice, there's not a lot of developers in our world, or development. Great question. Jose Alfredo, looking forward to signing up for the security architecture. Looking forward to seeing you in class, and I'm looking forward even more to the day where you told me you got your first security architect job. Always love getting that kind of news. If anybody's got some questions, please bring them in. You get to see social media, even on LinkedIn, different pins on qualifications of becoming an enterprise architect. You probably would. Now, here's the interesting one. How many of them come from actual working enterprise architects? And that's the big secret. You know what? People have come to me. They said a software developer told me this is how to learn to be a cloud architect. And I said, to be fair, a software developer doesn't know anything about being a cloud architect, just like a cloud architect doesn't know anything from being a software developer, unless they were a software developer, spent a year in training to be an architect, and then still knew. So there is that. So I would also tell you to do this. I recommend looking at people that have been principal architects or distinguished architects, or VPs or directors. And here's the reason why. Most people, I don't know how to say this. If someone's in a role too long and they haven't moved up, you've got to ask yourself why. I was the principal architect in 2 years, and I'll tell you why I was. And it's not because there's anything special about me. I did have some special communication skills, emotional intelligence skills, and sales skills from internal medicine, which was my previous career. And I did know how to get information a little better than the average person, because when you practice any kind of internal medicine, you have to learn how to ask the right questions. So I did have some extra skills there. And also I did have some extra skills in the world of evaluating trade-offs. For example, here's a great thing. Let's say someone has got a congested sinuses, and this is the medical perspective. This is pseudoephedrine. It's an over-the-counter medication for sinuses available in any part of the world. Now, the pseudoephedrine itself does a great job of opening the sinuses. But if I were to give a patient pseudoephedrine, what it also does, and it works by constricting the blood vessels in the nose, but it also constricts the blood vessels throughout the rest of the body. So I know if I'm going to give a patient pseudoephedrine, that it's going to raise their blood pressure. I know that it might also cause them to have anxiety along the way. And I have to consider, is that patient's sinus congestion worth the actual trade of the higher blood pressure, the higher heart rate, and the anxiety potentially for them? And it's the same thing in architecture. It's more about trade-offs. But why was I successful more so quickly is what I did in my first job is I went to my manager and I said, can I speak to the VP? My manager says, you just got here. I've got a manager, he's got a manager, and she's got a manager before the VP. Why do you want to go speak to the VP? Because it was not exactly an appropriate thing to ask, unlike my second day on the job. And I said to my manager vendor, I said, Devendra, I know this sounds silly to you, but I want to ask one of the VPs, specifically our VP, what does it take to reach VP level? What are the absolute best network architects that they would promote to principal and distinguished architect positions? And what does it take to be the best at the VP level? Devendra, are you okay with me asking these questions? And my manager says, okay, Mike, I'll prep him for this. He's never seen this before. But then again, we hired you with no experience and you're on the day 2 and you're already teaching people things. So let me figure it out. So when I went to the VP, which was 3 levels above mine, and I asked him, what's it going to take to be the best? He wrote down a few things. And he said, I need people that can communicate. I need people that can present. I need people that can lead. And he said, Mike, one of your strengths is you can translate this complicated stuff to what matters. And he said, I need people that can literally sell and translate. He said, that's the key. He said, it's not your technical expertise. And who was the first person to tell me that? So 2 years later, I was a principal architect. Why? Because I asked the people that were successful. I've been a chief architect. David Lithicum's been a chief architect. Russ White is another distinguished architect. If you're in networking, I recommend Ivan Pepelajak. Why? Because all of us are known all over the world. All of us are in the biggest tech publications. The media comes to us to ask for information, and they've made it. So I recommend going VP level, director level, VP level, principal architect, distinguished architect. And if you don't find one of them, don't ask, because they probably don't know. And I don't really get my news from LinkedIn or social media. Here's what I do. And I also recommend, while we're at it, if I want to see what's going on with AI, I follow NVIDIA as one of the people I also follow. I also follow what's going on at AMD. I look at what the CEO of Microsoft is saying. I look at what the CEO of OpenAI is saying. I look at what the CEO of every one of these companies is saying. I look at where they're putting their money. And I look at what the distinguished architects of these organizations say, and even the distinguished organizations and engineers, of which I've always been part of those organizations. Why? They're at the top. They've made it to the top. You ask them, they'll tell you how to get to the top, while the rest of the people are spending years and they've never made it there. So that's what I would do. And I'd be very careful where I get my information from. And that's what I tell my students. Get it from the people that are at the top, that are making the decisions and planning the future, not the people that are struggling to get there. I hope that helps. What habits or resources, blogs, podcast labs do you recommend for staying current in security trends? Well, it really depends on which part of the world you're in. And what I mean on that is, if you're an engineer, you might have to do some hands-on stuff. If you're a security architect, you have to focus on what designs are. So the good news is, first thing I recommend is getting strong fundamentals. That's the first thing of everything you're doing. And I'm running a free cybersecurity fundamentals training. If you want to sign up, Tyron put the link in the chat box. So when your fundamentals are good, you're going to realize a few things. One is, things are almost the same as they always were. You know, you put me together with David Lithicum, and I mentioned the word agentic AI, and he's like, yeah, 28 years ago, I worked on a version of agentic AI. AWS makes this post, we now allow IPsec encryption on direct connection, like it's a big deal. And I said, yeah, I did that in 1998 with Cisco. AWS makes an EC2 instance, VMware made it in 1999. So if we look very carefully about technology, and we really look at technology in the way it's architected and designed, it hasn't actually changed that much. So many, many years ago, we used to have the RISC CPU versus the x86, which is like your Intel and your AMD type CPUs. And this was about, I remember, because my Mac was a RISC CPU and it needed special coding. Fast forward 25 years, do we use an ARM processor or do we use an AMD EPYC? It's the same thing. It's just, it's changed. When I started in networking in like 1999, 1998, we had OSPF. We still have OSPF. When I started networking then, we had BGP. We have the same BGP. Very little has changed in the last, 25, 30 years. When VMware invented the virtual machine, they accidentally invented cloud computing. Well, so the key to remember is, all of this is, nothing's new. Now, when your fundamentals are really good, like mine, or like a Russ White, or a David Lithicum, or an Ivan Pepelnjak, what you see is, okay, every time something new comes out, oh, I've seen this before. I saw this version of this. So, for example, long before physical load balancers I saw a RAID card. And a RAID card in the server load balanced between 4 hard drives. And then I remember I remember we're like, Mike, we're going to be bringing load balancers into the network. And I'm like, what are load balancers? And they're like, it's a special device that's going to load balance across our 4 firewalls. This was like 25 years ago, because load balance weren't really part of networking. They weren't part of the compute team in those days. And when I heard that and I saw that, I said, well, I've seen this before. I saw it in a RAID card. And then when we started years later with cloud load balancing and multi-data center load balancing, which I was doing in those days, again, it was like a RAID card, but it was a different version. So if you truly look at it and you understand the fundamentals, and you understand the fundamentals of communication, and then you understand the fundamentals of storage, and the fundamentals of firewalls, and the fundamentals of compute, and the fundamentals of everything, you'll see it's going to be very easy to adapt to the changes, because it's actually just a new way of doing things. First AI architecture I worked on, and I can tell you, my responsibility was creating the lowest latency, high performance network that we could possibly have done to load balance between these giant Sun Microsystem servers. They were these blue refrigerators they looked the size of a refrigerator, and we had a bunch of them in the quickest network that we could set up between them, because we had an AI application that was going to look at news and look at what was going on in the market and bought and sold and traded. And that was the first AI application I worked with. Now, David Lithicum, who teaches our AI program, actually was working with AI in 1985. And he had so much experience with it that in 1990 he was working with NASA for it. So it feels new to most people. And why does it feel new? Because the only people that were doing it were these billion-dollar-plus architectures that David and I and the rest of the principal architects were working on. Because we got brought in to do these weird things that nobody was doing. But they're not new. They just feel new. You think cloud computing is new, but our first communication networks that I've worked on, for example, Frame Relay back in 1993, a little bit I was learning into it, even though it was just because I just found it fascinating. That was you connected to a cloud provider, and they created you virtual links to get to the other side of the cloud provider, a whole lot like AWS Private Link, for example. And then Frame Relay morphed into an ATM cloud, which we moved into. And then we created a BGP cloud, and we started virtualizing people's routes. And then we created an MPLS cloud, and that was, pushing, we were switching on labels, but it's all the same. It's been cloud computing, so people think it's new and exciting, but it's not. We've always been using clouds. It's just we added some compute and we added some storage, not just the networking gear to it. So that's the key to remember. If you truly build good, strong fundamentals, it's there. And then how do you stay current? Well, let's say it's security. I would go listen to what Cisco has to say. I would go listen to what Palo Alto has to say. I would go listen to what FortiGate has to say. I would go listen to what Microsoft has to say, because these are the organizations that have money and resources. I would also always look at what IBM has to say. And then I would also look out for there are some various security conferences which might be interesting. You could, especially from an understanding new threats kind of thing, where you can go. And then I would also, read industry publications that exist. For example, at least read CIO Magazine, minimum. And CIO Magazine will give you a good flair of everything that you need to be concerned about at that executive level. And as an architect, you have to be at that executive level, so that typically works. And that's what I would do. These are great questions. If you have some, please bring them. What skills are needed to become a disaster recovery architect? If you become a security architect, can skills transfer? So, Alexander, I would strongly recommend you try to become a security architect. You'll have many, 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 many more options as a security architect. You'll earn a lot more, and you'll still know how to do a good job of disaster recovery. So, Alexander, let's talk about when disaster recovery architectures were bigger. And I'll tell you when and where they were more complicated. So when I started my career 20 some years ago, here was the disaster recovery, what we did. We used to build off-site data centers. We used to stock these off-site data centers with stuff. We used to do some data replication into these data centers. And we needed a serious disaster recovery architect to be able to look and calculate what percentage of technology we could run on minimum systems, what kind of dark fiber we were running to these locations, and how many pieces of dark fiber we needed when we were setting it up, and how we would get redundant dark fibers if it was necessary across different fiber paths and things like that. We had people that were thinking about the data center power, so there was a lot that went into it. Now, fast forward in 2025, we have 4 architectural options for disaster recovery that are actually practical. And I'll explain to you what they are, which is why you're not going to find a lot of disaster work as a disaster recovery architect. Now, Alexander, I'll tell you more about the business continuity, which you would have more opportunity in a minute. Here's your disaster recovery options. So connect to a cloud provider, I don't care, IPsec tunnel, a private line. And on the cloud provider, you can make copies of your images, you back up your data, and you create an infrastructure as code script. And all in all, the organization can be up completely within a couple of hours. Architectural option 2, you know what, let me just map it out real time and I'll show you why there's not that much opportunity. And you know what, it'll be easy enough for me to draw all the options fairly quickly. And I think we have some time to do it anyway. So let me show you why there's really not a lot that's going to go into this now. So here's option 1. We got our data center over here, or our cloud provider, it doesn't matter. So let's call this as a data center, or this is, say, a cloud provider, or cloud provider A. Doesn't matter. So our first option, realistically speaking, is this architectural option. And this is why we don't use as many data centers, too many disaster recovery architects anymore. This is option 1. I've got images of my virtual machines. Now I've got, this could be container images, virtual machine images, what have you. I keep my data here, which I back up, say, every 24 hours, or whatever, or whatever kind of RPM we need. So let's just say data. So here's our architectural option 1. We basically keep some kind of connectivity between this to keep the data synchronized, and poof. And any problem happens, we use an infrastructure as code script, move these things forward, and everything's great. So let's talk about the next one, and I'll show you why if my mouse will unfreeze up in a second, which it occasionally does. Bear with me. Hopefully my mouse will unfreeze itself in a second. My keyboard works. Let's try this. Oh, something moved. Okay, we're back. Okay, so, nope, my mouse froze. So the next architectural option, which clearly I can't draw until my mouse actually comes back, is going to be the following. It's going to be, we now synchronize our databases between our data center and the cloud provider. And in addition to synchronizing those, the databases between our data center and this alternative cloud provider, we still have virtual machine images and we still back up our data. And poof, anything happens. We've got fresh databases, which is good. We run our infrastructure as code script, and then we're done. The third option that we typically use is basically this. We take our data center. Let's say our data center has 10 different applications running on 100 different servers. So what we do is we make a small version of everything that we have in the data center. So instead of having 10 servers to this application, we make 1. And instead of having 50 servers for this application, we make 1. And instead of having 30 servers for this application, we have 1. We keep our databases synchronized. And as soon as there's an outage at our main data center, DNS shifts all the traffic over. It goes to our cloud provider. Our data is already synchronized and up to date. And as soon as the incoming traffic comes in and overwhelms, cloud auto scaling will increase the capacity of the new things. And within 45 minutes or so, we're up and fully operational. Nothing to think about. And of course, the last option is just be up on another cloud. But because of that, you're not going to see that much as a rule. opportunity for disaster recovery architects. Now, let's talk about the bigger side of this that you might not be talking about. And this again brings it up more to an executive level. So now let's say you are a security architect and you are creating a risk mitigation strategy, or you're an executive. The business continuity side is often just as equally important, and there's often more opportunity. And why is that? So let's say I've got a hospital. The disaster recovery side is, how do I get our tech systems up and running? The business continuity side is, how do I keep that hospital up and running? If I can't keep that hospital up and running, how do I evacuate the hospital and get my patients to a new hospital? If this is broken, how do we deal with that? So the business continuity matters more. If there was a massive comet that hit New York City, for example, and a company that's in New York City, how do we run, and that's the headquarters, how do we run the, sorry, I watched the Comet movie the other night. Was it Deep Impact? Or I think it was Deep Impact. But anyway, so what if that happened in New York? What about the rest of the business? Can we get that business up and operational in Philadelphia? That's business continuity planning. So it's the other side of disaster recovery planning. That would give you more options as a business continuity planning person. But the reality is, so much of this work now is being done by cloud architects because it's so simple. So much of this backup work is being done at the enterprise architect level, and so much of it at the security architect level, that I think you'll earn twice as much as a security architect. And if you found that business continuity and disaster recovery planning was more and fun for you later, what I would do is add more business acumen and focus more on the business continuity side, because I don't think there's that much in today's world of disaster recovery. When I was younger and we were trying to run all these calculations, determine what we had and what we didn't, totally different. But in today's world, not really, not such a big deal. Hope that helps. How do you improve return on investment for this, or for the security investment made in the organization? So it's going to take a lot. And as obviously, I'm not going to be able to teach this here. That's why we have a program. But let's actually talk about what you typically do. So the first thing we actually do is assess an organization's risk. Now, how do we assess an organization's risk? We have to figure out what those assets are. We have to figure out what the risk to those assets are, and the risk of an asset being partially deployed, or partially destroyed, or completely destroyed. And if anybody has some questions, please feel free to bring them in. So we have to look at that. So if we look at an organization, because there's a lot of ways that we can do this. And if I first look at an organization and I can quantify let's say $125 million risk, and that's what the current risk is. And then I can come in and spend $10 million on some security control measures. And I can spend another $5 million on transferring the risk to a third party. And I can spend another $10 million, say, doing some training and mitigating some risk by, enhancing the culture. If I'm able, and I forget the numbers I used, but if I'm able to be able to say, okay, we spent $30 million on risk and we mitigated $120 million of risk, that's easy. So that's at first your pro forma calculations. You're going to have to show what the risk is. So we start out with the main risk, then we mitigate certain risks, and then we reduce the risk. We look at our residual risk, and that's part of risk mitigation, what we're doing. Now, how else do we do it? Well, we can also look at other key performance indicators, but it won't be an ROI, because the ROI is going to be what they spent versus what they got for it. So if it's $125 million of risk and we can mitigate the risk for $25 million, we determined a 500% ROI. Now, how else do we use after the fact that we can actually do? Well, we can actually look at the number of breaches they had before the investment versus after the investment and look at the cost of each of those breaches. So if breach one was $10 million and breach two after we mitigated it was $5 million, well, that's $5 million that we saved there, for example. Now, if part of our investment was doing So if part of our investment was implementing some free features that they already had. Now, free features are not free because sure, we can run access control lists on the routers and layer 2 filters and admission control if they don't have it, and we can do traffic shaping, traffic policing, but there's still a cost of the labor that's involved to do it. So those would be kind of one of those things that you typically would need to be able to, that you could also look at. But you could look at cost of incidents, you could look time to detect incidents, you could calculate the damage caused by an incident, and all of these things you could say, well, we've achieved this compared to what our goals are. But the first thing of determining any ROI on any technology is starting out with the executive level, and I'll show you why. Let's say it's not security. Let's say it's a new website. So if the new website costs $10 million, for example, and the new $10 million website generated $30 million of sales, and the company has a 50% margin, that ultimately means that it ultimately means that they got to a slightly better return on investment. And that's the key, is we've got to be able to calculate whatever it is they're trying to achieve. They spent $5 million, got $15 million at a 50% thing. They got $7.5 million for the $5 million, and that's their ROI. So we have to know what they cost versus what they're getting. But the key is to know what we're measuring in any architecture, which is why I always start with the executives. Okay, you want a new AI recommendation for your engine for sales. How do you measure success? Increased revenue, Mike. Okay, increased revenue is what we're going to look at. Are we looking for anything else, like customer dwell time increasing? So they have to tell you what metric they want measured. So that's typically what you're determining, but you can look at pre-risk, post-risk, and calculate some ROI. You could look at current risk versus mitigated risk and calculate an ROI there. And then after the fact, you can calculate other things. So lots of things to look at based upon what the executives told you were trying to solve in the first place. How can one overcome imposter syndrome or lack of confidence when taking on a security architect role the first time? So let's talk about real imposter syndrome, and let's talk about discomfort when you're not sure. So real imposter syndrome, true imposter syndrome, is when you have someone and they're great at whatever they do, they're known and established as an expert, and they worry. So, for example, if we had Usain Bolt, the super fast runner from Jamaica, and every time he was going to race somebody, he was afraid, am I really a runner? Am I really fast? Even though the world knew him as the fastest. That's imposter syndrome. It's when you have a cardiothoracic surgeon that's an expert with 30 years in their job, and they get scared to talk in front of a peer of other cardiothoracic surgeons. That is what do you call it? Imposter syndrome. And usually that takes some good degree of psychological intervention, some breathing types of intervention, and a whole lot of ways changing about the way that person thinks, usually some cognitive therapy and other ways along the way. Now let's talk about what I call fake imposter syndrome that everyone has. And I expect this kind of syndrome, that fake imposter syndrome, in every decent person I ever want to meet, anyone who cares. And I'll tell you what I did. Cloud Doctor, when I started my networking career back in 2000, I think it was my first networking job was in 2000. I remember I felt like a fraud. I mean, I was practicing internal medicine as a nurse practitioner. It's all I knew. I wanted to work in networking. I played in networking. I had a CCNP and a CCDP and some other things that I did along the way. I did a lot of labs. I did a lot of this, but I thought I didn't know networking. And I'll tell you what I did on my first job is I was so scared. And my wife and I did this when we graduated our master's degrees as well. I was so terrified, Cloud Doctor, that anybody was going to see how little I knew, that I said to my wife, I said, I know I borrowed money from your brother to take some of these certifications and boot camps. And I know we borrowed some money from your father. Are you okay with me getting another? And I maxed out our credit card for the CCIA, which is how I started my tech career, which soon, a couple months later, I had a CCIA as well. And I remember saying, can I get a credit card? And my wife says, why? I said, because I don't want anybody to know how little I do. So if I buy everybody lunches and dinners and drinks for a couple of weeks, I figure it'll be a few $1,000s. By the time people realize I don't know anything, they'll already like me and they'll take me under the wing and they'll help me. That was my plan. And I remember when I was like, yeah, it sounds like a reasonable plan. One of the cool ways you do things, but it sounds like it would work. What I didn't know is I was there on the first day, Cloud Doctor. And as soon as I was there on the first day, someone had asked a question as somebody else, and they couldn't figure it out. And I said, all you've got to do is this. And they're like, really? And because I just got there, I was the new person. I'm like, yeah, seriously. It's because of this reason. Because I read it in the book. I told it to them, it worked. They're like, wow, you're smart. Now, I was still terrified. So what I did is I went home and I literally read like a book each day from Cisco. I'd stay up half the night. I did it. I was terrified. And then a week later, they had a big outage, one of the clients, and nobody could figure it out. And I said, look, can I come in and help? I kind of have an idea. I looked at it, issued a debug command, saw a message that wasn't right, and then poof, helped them with it, and it was done. And, you know, I did this again and again, and all of a sudden, the next thing I realized, I'm teaching half of the people I work with. I had 10 routers on my desk. I was teaching network engineering at the time. I wrote up, you know, here's the bit thing on BGP. Here we're all going to do a BGP lab. Here's a thing on OSPF, because they were engineers and they needed to be hands-on. I didn't know that I was actually started teaching back then. It accidentally happened, and it happened out of my fear. When my wife and I were first nurse practitioners out of school, we bought every medical book you could possibly find, and literally each day we read one with that obsessive thought. So the key is, when you're done your training, get trained by great people. Get trained by David Lithicum, or we can train you, or if it's networking, Russ White can train you, but get trained by the best. Go in there with good skills and be confident in your skills. And you'll actually see in the first couple of days, if you train right, you might be better than some people that have actually been in the job already. And if you do that, all of a sudden, once you see that you're ready, once you see that you're capable, your imposter syndrome will go away. So that's what I tell my students, be much better. And when you finally have the skill, you won't be afraid of anything. And people will come to you, they'll respect you, and that'll go away. And then to me, the success of having that go away, the anxiety of having that go away, became a different anxiety. Now it became, Mike, could you teach me this thing? So then I had a little anxiety to become a better teacher, which made me better, because each day I tried to be better because I knew that was what I was doing. So I hope that kind of helps. That's what I did, and that's what I recommend. Would I suggest TOGAF or SABSA certification? Still worth it if someone's preparing to be a security architect? Also, in the world of AI, would you suggest these are still important? So I actually do like TOGAF as an enterprise architecture framework. It works well. The majority of all global enterprises that are big are actually using the TOGAF framework. So when I train cloud architects and I train enterprise architects, I generally recommend it. But would I give it to a security architect? No. And in the world of AI, these become even more important. And why is that? So we have to look at the things that AI can do, and we have to look at the things that AI can't do. And AI can build our stuff, AI can code it, AI can figure it, but what it can't do is the following. It can't meet with the client, it can't develop a relationship with the client, it can't sell your billion-dollar architecture, it can't lead your architecture team, it can't evaluate trade-offs, it can't meet with stakeholders, negotiate between stakeholders, do any of the architect work. So AI just creates these jobs. Now, why would these TOGAF be important? Or SABSA, although I've never seen anybody that actually used SABSA in the last 25 years. I've never worked with a client that used it, so I wouldn't do SABSA. I hear about it sometimes in the Middle East, but, you know, honestly speaking, I probably wouldn't waste my time on SABSA because I don't know anybody that uses it, but I know a lot of companies that use TOGAF. But it's an enterprise architecture framework. It's coming up with enterprise architecture terminology, like a vocabulary, so we all speak the same language. It's talking about enterprise architecture documents that are there. But what's the point of enterprise architecture, which is the exact opposite of AI architecture? Enterprise architecture is, how do we structure the organization? Do we need tightly coupled systems or loosely coupled systems? Do we need strict business processes or loose business processes? What are the processes, business processes? How do we optimize those processes? What are that business's capabilities? How do we help that business do those things that it does better? How do we better manage the organization's financial resources? Which project would be better for our organization? Which is closer to drive revenue or whatever our actual architecture goals are? How many people will we need? Do the people have the sophistication to bring in a technology like this? So that's architecture. And AI gives us more opportunities, much more opportunities for business. So AI causes a need for more people. Now, one would argue that AI further enhances the need of a TOGAF type framework, or any framework for that matter, like a Zachman framework, SABSA framework. Because if we actually look at the data, as it stands, only 14% of organizations have made any efforts to match their key business needs with the AI architectural solution. So they've got techies designing their AI, business people knowing they need AI, but they've been so bad at following any enterprise architecture process. So nobody started with the executives and determined what they need. None of these architectures, for the most part, they mapped with AI recently. They mapped out any of the business value streams, any of the business capabilities. They just made the tech. And because of that, only 5% or so, less than 15% of any of the AI architectures are doing anything of value for the clients. So yes, we don't want to see people just waste money. We want to see people follow a good enterprise architecture framework for anything. Don't spend until you know its impact on the business. Don't invest because maybe the architecture that you have, if you don't understand the business processes properly, could hurt the business. So that's the key. So sure, definitely believe we need a good followed structured methodology, and TOGAF is great. There's nothing wrong with SABSA other than I don't know anybody really that uses it or many people that use it. And because of that, it's like getting a certification in a methodology that nobody knows. So if I was going to do one, I would do TOGAF. And if I didn't want to do TOGAF, I'd probably do Zachman, but I would strongly recommend TOGAF. But those would be the ones that I would do, but not as a security architect, only as an enterprise architect. Now, security architects, I got to tell you, here's what I do. I train them with the best skills in the world. Then I make them what hiring manager wants. Then I give them a portfolio. And then when security architects train with us, we train them in a CISSP, because that's a security architecture certification, a CCSP, and a CISM, because they're related to the cloud security architect role. They won't teach you the role in these certifications. They're just branding, which is why we teach you the job first. But those are the certifications that look good for a security architect. For an enterprise architect, TOGAF looks great. Hi, Mike. What is the relationship between strategic planning, initiative delivery, and technology optimization? I don't really understand your question. I'm trying to break it down. So strategic planning would be what you would do to determine what you would do to determine what you need to do. How you would deliver things is the project management side, who does what, when they do it, or have you. And technology optimization is what we do as architects. So they're loosely coupled, and you're trying to draw a relationship of three separate buzzwords, and I don't really know that it's going to make sense. So if I tried to logically group these things, I would say the first thing you do is you meet with the C-suite in any architecture to determine their goals, to determine their pain points, to determine their challenges. Now, in the process of that, what you're trying to deal with is to then determine what that business needs. How can that business be better? What's the strategy for the business? Is the strategy to keep acquiring customers? That's going to change the architecture. Is the strategy to grow retail with AI? That's going to change the architecture. Is the strategy to have AI start writing all the new code for the organization? That's a different architecture and a different strategy. So yeah, I guess you could say at the top that all becomes strategy. Now, after we have strategy, we have to determine the organization's capabilities. And then we need to determine how do we enhance those capabilities. So let's say I've got a sales rep. How do I make the sales rep better at their job? Do we train them? That's part of our enterprise architecture. Do we have an onboarding program? That's part of our enterprise architecture. Is there a mentorship? That's part of our enterprise architecture for the sales reps. And oh, by the way, maybe, just maybe, there's some sales tool or technology that can make that sales rep better. So that's what we determine from a technology perspective, what's going to help that person do their job. That's, the architecture piece. Now, technology optimization could be anything. It's a meaningless term to me. It could be migrating our stuff out of AWS because it cost us 3 times more in AWS than it did at our data center. It could be anything from determining that, wow, for this organization, we only need one supernet route of 172.168.0.0/16. But literally speaking, we've got 1,000 subnets inside of that on the WAN, and the WAN keeps flopping, which is causing an overhead on the router. So maybe we need to summarize or aggregate. Maybe an organization has 1,000 applications and they need to reduce it to 20 of them because all the applications do the same thing. Maybe the organization is on slow technology and they need new servers so they can be faster. So technology optimization could be anything. And all these things you gave me honestly could be anything in any career. Strategic planning could be determined, how do I discharge my patient and who do they from the hospital and who do they need to speak to on the way? So I kind of gave you more of a roundabout answer because I don't know how to necessarily tie 3 buzzwords together. So I tried to give you through the architectural process. Why do CTOs and CIOs need an enterprise architect? What value do they bring? Well, looks like my mouse is working again. So let's kind of whiteboard it out and I'll show you. So we got to look at what everybody does. So if we look here, so we have the CEO. We have, let's say, the CFO. We've got the chief operating officer, which probably should be next to the CEO because they're typically the person that's the number 2. Then we have the CFO. Then we have a CIO. Now, at this point, the chief executive officer is responsible for the strategy of the organization. The chief operating officer is responsible for the way that organization works, key business processes, what have you. The chief financial officer is responsible for the organization's money and where it goes and where it doesn't go, which is why you need to be able to influence this person. The chief technology officer now has a couple of jobs to do. They're ultimately responsible for the strategy of the organization, and they're also responsible for running the organization. So let's take the CIO for right now, and we're just going to stretch it out to here. I'll get rid of these other C-suite positions because they're no longer needed here. So the CIO is an executive. So this means they're going to be a business executive. At this point, they don't know anything about technology. They have to focus on business. They know a little bit at an executive level, at the architect level, but they also have to run a company. So now you've got this person, and this person now has to have a couple kind of people working for them, don't they? So they need to have somebody that's going to run security, to run the security department, which is typically the CISO. They typically need somebody to run all of the IT people that are going to be working for them. Because again, this could be 1,000 people that are working for the CIO. They can't be creating a strategy and managing and leading 1,000 people at the same time. That'd be ridiculous. The company would be out of business because you can't be the leader and do the doer at the same time. And you also typically have over here a chief architect. So this chief architect is ultimately going to be the person that's responsible for the strategy. Now, this is an enterprise architect role. So this person's responsible for getting stuff done. This person's responsible for strategy. And this person's responsible for the security engineers doing their job and the security architects and their strategy. So we go one level down to an enterprise architect. Now, some could say, and actually we should put the CTO here as well. And the CTO, again, could be working for the chief architect or the CIO, depending upon the way it's set up. So we've got the CTO that's looking more at technology stuff. Overly focused on technology, overly focused on make sure the business is running, completely focused on strategy and operations. Because again, the CISO could be managing a 100-person team too, or a 200-person team. So none of these people are going to have the ability to do architecture, except for this chief architect. Now that chief architect will have enterprise architects working for them. And here we're focused on people, processes, technology, AI agents. So this is everything. And this one person will know how to deal with the 4 elements of enterprise architecture, but we're dealing with an 80% business executive here. So that person's not going to be able to deal with the current technology and all of that technology and still be capable. So we'll typically have a multi-cloud architect that's going to be here. And here, we're basically focusing on pure strategy. Here, we're focusing primarily on strategy at the business side with some tech. Here, we've got these multi-cloud architects that are going to be responsible for our data centers and our cloud. Now, that means we've got someone that's responsible for a lot of stuff that they could never possibly in their life know about everything. So then what we do is we'll have another layer lower where we'll have our specialty architects. So we'll have, say, a security architect that's focused on security. They'll need the help from an IAM architect that's also focused on security. Now we'll also have some network architects that are going to be here that it's going to take. And then it's going to take some AI architects over here. And it's going to take some data architects over here. I call them data architects. It's going to take so many other kinds of architects. And we're also going to get some solutions architects that are going to come to us from the cloud providers. So AWS is going to send people to try and convince us to buy and use their stuff, a sales rep and a solutions architect. Azure is going to do the same thing. So they're all going to be for us. And why is this? Because this person could never create the strategy, which is a full-time job, and run it. This person can never focus on all these business things all day long if they're too focused on looking at new kinds of technology and cool stuff. This person has probably 50 or 100 people working for them from a security perspective. This enterprise architect could have 100 architects working for them. And of course, we'll have one other level of solutions architects. So let's say we're security architects. We'll get solutions architects from Cisco. And the Cisco solutions architects will try to convince us to use their firewalls. Palo Alto will send us their solutions architects to try to convince us. So that's going to be the architect continuum. So, you're not going to see the generals and admirals on the battlefield. You're going to see them from a command center because you can't do everything yourself, especially in an executive role. You need a team. And that's why every president and prime minister may have offices of hundreds of people working for them, because they can't do it all themselves. To be a strategist, you need an army in many cases of people working for you. Good questions, though. And your company has no enterprise architecture in place. Does it make sense starting with solution architecture for what you have? Network security and systems, then having a consultant for the big picture. If you do that, here's what's going to happen. And that's probably already happening. Company's going to spend money on technology. They're going to get nothing for it. And 3 years from now, 4 years from now, 5 years from now, a smarter competitor will put them out of business. So if they don't have it, I wouldn't stay there. I really wouldn't. Because at the end of the day, I don't want to be part of a company where everybody gets laid off. I already did that early in my quarter. I was at a company and every quarter they did a layoff. And after 13 layoffs, my job wasn't really threatened. But after watching 13 layoffs in this company and losing friends and losing friends and losing friends and losing friends and losing friends, I just was one of the reasons I wanted out of that. But that's what happens when companies are run poorly. They just don't make it. And they don't make it as in anything. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Starting with solutions architecture is just, here's what it really is. So Andy, here's what happens if you start with the solutions architecture. So Andy, you're going to go on a trip. And it is going to be a 30-day trip. And somebody else is going to pack your suitcase without knowing where you're going to go. Now, if you arrive in Antarctica and you don't have any winter clothes, I promise you those 30 days are going to be no fun. Now, what if you end up in Miami and all you have is clothes for Antarctica? Why would that happen? That's what happens when you start with solutions architecture. Here, we're going to design something for a problem that we don't know what it is to create something that we don't know how it's going to be used. That's what happens if you start with solutions architecture. So imagine this. All right. Here, I was doing a demo with my students the other day where I was trying to show that everything has a trade-off. So I picked up a couple medications that I could use. But here, let's go back to our Sudafed. Should we just give this to everybody? What if the patient has incredibly high blood pressure and we give it to them and they had a stroke? What if they're in their last legs of left-sided congestive heart failure and we give them a stimulant and they have a heart attack? So that's what happens when you start at solutions architecture. So when you go to your physician, they say, what brings you in today? And when the patient says, my throat hurts, we say, what makes your throat better? And they say, drinking tea. And I say, okay. And they say, what makes your throat worse? They say, screaming at you, Mike. And I say, all right, don't scream at me then. And then I look in their eyes, ears, nose, throat, listen to their carotid arteries, make sure there's no bruise, listen to their heart or lungs, push on their belly, ask them to open their mouth, stick out their tongue, and whoa, you've got a red sore throat. And typically speaking, a sore throat or pharyngitis is caused by beta hemolytic strep group B, which typically speaking, and I say, okay, well, you have a sore throat. I can culture it or I can give you an antibiotic right now. And they say, I don't care what it is. I just want to get better. And I give the patient, and I say, are you allergic to penicillin? And they say no. And I give them amoxicillin and they get better. Well, the key here is I didn't know what drug to give until I knew what the problem. Now, if I was really smart and I cultured, I didn't know exactly what the bacteria is and I can use a more targeted antibiotic. That is architecture. Physician work is architecture. Law work is architecture. So imagine the physician just said, Mike, you need surgery. And I said, why do I need surgery? And they said, everybody's getting surgery today. That's our solutions architecture. Everybody's getting shoulder surgery today, whether you need it or not. That's what happens when you started solutions architecture. So I'd get a new job. I'd stay there. I'd enjoy it. And then I'd find a company that has a good business strategy that's going to make it. Because here, we'll have some people determine what the patient needs. And then we're going to have other people in another part of the world figure out how to take care of them. It just doesn't work. Enterprise architects work with executives for business strategy, absolutely, as and enhancing business capabilities. Does that person, because there's plenty of ladies and men that are both enterprise architects, work with the implementations as well? No. We can't focus on strategy if we are focused on implementation. Now, we will potentially work with the implementation teams when we design the plan. So we might have to create an architectural contracts, and there'll be architectural MOUs or statements of work. And I might ask some of the engineers, how long will it take you to build this, so I can figure out how long it would take. Although usually I work with a good project manager or program manager that has the times, but no, I'm not typically there for implementation. Now, if something happens along the way during the implementation where they need a change, now I might be part of the architectural review board where they say, we want to change this, and they submit a change request and it goes to a team of the people, and a team of people say yes or no, this request will work. Now I might be involved on that, but no, I'm not going to be part of the implementation team. So let's say I'm working for Cisco, where I spent about a decade as a chief enterprise architect for the healthcare vertical. So, I'd meet with a client, I'd create a strategy, and they'd go on with the strategy, and I'd go to a new client. And that's always what I've done for 25 years because I've been a consulting architect. But all in all, no, I mean, other than in a governance meeting, the implementation engineers are doing their job and we're creating a strategy job. So, but no, we don't do a lot with implementation teams. Is there a such thing as an enterprise security architect? Well, here's what an enterprise architect is. And then here's what a security architect is, and I'll tell you what the difference is. So an enterprise architect focuses on the strategy, the people, the processes, technology. The security architect focuses on protecting the organization, its assets, and its people. So you may hear the term enterprise security architect, and that's not a term at all. What it really means is it's a security architect that's working for enterprise clients versus small businesses. So you might be at a company like a Cisco, and they have people that work, there are security architects that work in commercial solutions, which are small businesses. maybe businesses with a few hundred people. And then they had other architects like me that would be on the enterprise side or the global side that would work for companies that say had 200,000 employees and thousands of and things that were much more complicated. So that's all an enterprise security architect is. Just a security architect that's working for a very large company. It's not an enterprise architect or a security architect. But it's a great, great, great question. Will our program teach you everything you need to be an enterprise architect? Absolutely. That's why we have the program, and we expect you to stay in the program and come to classes until the day you're working as an enterprise architect. We cover the business, we cover the tech, we cover the strategy, we cover the negotiation, we cover the executive presence, we cover the CXO relevancy, all of it. And why did I create that program, Andy? Well, I created it for a couple of reasons. First thing was, here's how I ultimately became a chief architect and took on these enterprise architect roles. I had a solutions architect job and I got an MBA, and then I had to get, extra leadership training on top of the MBA, extra executive presence training, extra CXO relevancy training. I mean, extra leadership training, extra sales training, which probably cost as much as a very expensive Mercedes. Let alone, so actually I can say it was about a $300,000 education to make it to that level. So because most people don't have the ability to do it, and I was very grateful I got lucky. My companies helped pay for a lot of that, which relieves a lot of the burden from me. I created this because I can teach this so other people don't need it. So there's a single stop shop to learn how to create an RO model, how to develop your executive presence, how to lead a design strategy session, how to lead a proof of concept session, because we don't touch the technology in a proof of concept, how to respond to an RFP. And my students do it all the time. In fact, my students right now are giving me presentations from their last architecture project in class. And there were two things. They were creating a unified communications expert network, and they were creating an AI recommendation engine and sales tools. So, my students work on these things all the time, and they stay in the program like any of our programs until the day they're hired. We're not a boot camp. People train with us until the day they're hired. Why don't you come join us on one of our architect webinars? You can learn a little more about what we do. But yes, we will definitely teach you everything until you're hired. And that means all the sales, all the business, all the presentations, all of it. Would I say anyone can become an architect? The answer is yes, and I'll give you some reasons why I know that. And you have to have the right skill. So, Alexander, I'm an introvert. I'm a serious introvert. And I'll tell you how I became an architect. I spent 7 years in school paying my way through college by being a firefighter paramedic. Did that for approximately 7 years. Took me 5 years to go to school because I had a full-time job, and another extra year because I couldn't figure out what I was going to do. By the time I did my bachelor's degree, I basically had a degree in psychology as well as a bachelor's degree in nursing. Then I worked as an ER nurse for 2 weeks, and I hated it, Alexander. I mean, it was the first time in my life I said, I don't know how I'm going to live like this. So I quit that job. I went to school to be a nurse practitioner. I graduated with honors. I had my own internal medicine office. I had an associate in the office as well. I also had a weight loss practice because I've always coached people on health and wellness and fitness my entire life, either in medicine or in some other way, shape, or form. That practice was doing fairly well, but I loved networking. Like, I just loved it. As soon as I saw networking and realized what was going on and realized I could communicate to my relatives in Greece with very little money, I was like, this whole networking thing impressed me. So I had my internal medicine office, and I had a good 6-figure job. This is going back, 20 some years ago. So I couldn't exactly afford to leave that job with, $100,000 plus of student loans and then be able to get a job that didn't pay me anything. I just couldn't do it. So what I had said to my wife said, Mike, you love this tech thing. Just go get a job in tech. And I said, yes, but I won't hurt our family financially. So what I did is I built a plan, and the whole plan didn't completely work. I went and got a whole bunch of certifications, which did not work. And then when that did not work, here's what I did. I literally went and spoke to 50 recruiters, and I asked all 50 recruiters the following question. And I said, if you were going to hire a network architect or a senior network engineer that was so good, the second they walked in an interview, you would hire them. What would those traits be that makes them the best of the best of the best? And you know what they told me? All 50, they said, Mike, whether you have the certification or not, they want the skills of a CCIA. They're looking for your ability to make trade-offs, to understand scaling issues, to understand performance and availability, and all these other things that weren't in my CCIE or CCNP. They said, I need you to have this, 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 this. And guess what? I built a plan. I built a 6-month plan from the time I was certified to develop the skills that I got hired. I should have developed the skills first, and that's part of my system. So I spent exactly 6 months studying and learning all the things. Now, I'm an honest person with myself. I wrote down everything and I said, I'm good at this, I'm good at this, I'm good at this, I'm good at this, I'm good at this. I don't know this, but the 50 people that were saying the best architects and engineers needed to know this, I didn't have any of the skills that were not listed in the things that needed to be the perfect engineer or architect at the time, because I didn't know the difference. I know now. And then all of a sudden, what would it take to be so loved they would hire you on the first spot? As soon as I felt I was there, at that point, Alexander, and I'm an introvert. I've just learned how to communicate, but I'm an introvert. And you can see a video where my manager, who knew me when I was an introvert, explained it. It's on this channel. I'll get to it in a minute. And I took all of it in. I did everything. And as soon as I felt I had it, I called a recruiter named Drago. My buddy gave me his name. This guy Drago, he was in, I think, Piscataway, New Jersey, or was it New Brunswick, New Jersey. And I go on my first interview, and when the gentleman that interviewed me, his name was Devendra. He was from Punjab. He was a really, really nice guy. And Devendra asked me an interview question. I answered. He asked me another one. I answered. I asked me another one. I answered. And he said, Mike, I know you applied to be a network engineer, but it's not a good enough job. And he moved me into a senior network engineer role as my first role. And then 3 months later, I was into an architecture role. And 2 years later, I was in a principal architect role. Why? Because someone got me there. Now, here's the thing. I am an introvert. When I was younger, I was afraid to talk to anybody. Anybody they dated growing up was because the girl came up to me and asked me out on a date, because I was just an introvert. There's a video on our YouTube channel. You'll see Alvin DaCosta, Tyron, if you can find it. He's one of the VPs at NVIDIA. He and I used to work together at Cisco. And he said, I knew Mike. Mike is an introvert. And here's what used to happen. We used to have all these Cisco offsites. And as soon as we'd get there, I would get myself a nice glass of Macallan 18, a good scotch, and I would go hide in the corner and skip my scotch, because I just didn't like, going out there. I didn't really want to talk to people. I was an introvert. I was shy. And then I decided to realistically do something. I decided I was tired of being the introvert. I decided I was tired of being in the lower position because I couldn't go out there and talk. And I decided to just do it. Did I take presentation courses? Yes. Did I get executive presence training courses? Yes. But I went out there and did it. And you know what? I have to tell you, after a while of talking to people, the shyness that I had became excitement. Look who I can meet. And in some part, it became every point of our day. Do what you are afraid of, and very soon you won't be afraid of it. I was petrified of snakes for my entire life. I like being outside, but I was always worried about snakes. Not mountain lions, not bears, snakes. I got to tell you, I was just afraid of snakes. About 5 years ago, I got my wife angry at me. I knew she loved kittens, so I got a kitten to make my wife happy. Had no idea the kitten I would love so much, but that's neither here nor there. That kitten likes to hunt snakes. I have no idea why. So my cat Cindy, she goes out and she brings me back a snake, and I pick up the snake with tongs. I take it outside. She brings me back a snake. And I'll tell you, after the 10th or 11th snake, I'm no longer afraid of snakes. She just does it. And I ask her not to bring home snakes, but I can't convince my cat Cindy not to do it. My leadership skills aren't good enough to convince a cat not to hunt. I've tried, but so be it. But that's the key. So the more you do it, you'll be there. Now, Alexander, if you train with us, I'm going to tell you some other things. I recommend a little bit of cognitive behavior therapy. And I actually teach it in our program to everyone to get over interview fear and speech fear. And why do I teach it? Because it's being taught to Olympians, it's being taught to Navy SEALs. And what is that? And I used to use it with my patients, and it was highly effective. So what happens is many of us have thinking errors that cause us to be anxious. If I give a presentation, I'm going to do a bad job. And then you're afraid to do it. Now, if you're going to give a presentation about something you're good at, and you ask yourself, why am I going to give a good job? And you're afraid you're going to do a bad job. You ask yourself why. And then you say, well, I've done a good amount of preparation. This is something that I know a lot of. I'm a leading expert on this, and there's no reason for me to be afraid. And then you do it, and you think, and you're fine. I will tell you the other things that I recommend, and we use them, is there's various forms of breathing that we strongly recommend to control anxiety. One pattern of breathing is called box breathing. You can look that up. That's widely used with special operations military. It's widely used by, again, Olympians. And that's basically a breathing pattern where you basically would do this. You would exhale your air completely from your lungs, and you would inhale for a count of 4. So inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, as soon as you take that inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, you hold that for a count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then you exhale. You exhale for a count of 4, and then you hold for a count of 4. And you repeat that cycle 4 times. That's widely being taught. And that's very helpful. But there's other forms of meditation, which we teach also. See, I look at it this way. Everybody's afraid of something. And whether you're afraid of an interview or you're afraid of giving a speech, it's still fear. I teach a lot of fear mitigation techniques because you're going to be in an interview potentially for a $500,000 job 10 years from now, 5 years from now as an architect. And you're going to be scared. And if you can control your anxiety and control your fear, you have a much better chance to get it. Because when we're scared, here's what happens. The prefrontal cortex, or the logical thinking part of our brain, shuts down, which is where we're calm. The amygdala part of our brain kicks in, which again is not good, because that's when you argue with someone and you say something you regret because the prefrontal cortex shut down and the amygdala kicked in. So we teach you how to calm that. And that's part of everything we do, is looking at the entire person. Maybe it's my internal medicine background. Maybe it's that I loved yoga so much and practiced yoga so much for over 18 years. I became a yoga instructor. Maybe it's my 30 years of martial arts that I've done that taught me how to think about calming and breathing. But I think you have to be able to control your thinking. You have to be able to control your stress level, and you have to be in charge of your body. You do that, you'll go much further. So that's what I would do. And if you don't train with us, there's a book called Feeling Good by David Burns that's all about cognitive behavior therapy. It's such a good book that I used to keep it stocked in my medical practice. And every single time I had a patient that walked in, they were saying, Mike, I don't feel right, I handed it out. And you know what? I even have a copy of it in this office here. I saw it. It is this book. I used to hand it out to my patients all the time. Anybody with anxiety, anybody with depression, they typically did very well with this, almost as effectively as medications. But I'm not recommending this as a psychiatric treatment. I'm recommending it as a performance enhancer. For any medical reasons, obviously, go see your doctor, what have you. But that's typically what I'm recommending. And it's very good. Although if you're trained with us, we'll get into even better performance things. But if you're not, I think that would help you in your career. But it's all about learning the right skills. I mean, Yvonne was a waiter. We trained him. He's now working at AWS. Al was a sales rep. He took his first job as a senior solutions architect at Deloitte after we trained him. Jermaine was selling landscaping gear, but now he's an enterprise architect. Wallace Agana, again, sales rep at JP Morgan Chase, now as an enterprise architect. Jennifer was a mental health tech working at JP Morgan Chase. Balwinder was a stay-at-home mom before we found her, and now she's a cloud solutions architect at Microsoft. Pierre was a sailboat operator at 24 and now working as a security architect. I'm sorry, a cloud solutions architect for, I think it was LeaseWeb. But the point, Emmanuel, for example, came to us and now working as a security architect in the UK. It's not where you come from. It's all about skill. Maybe come join us on the How to Become a Security Architect webinar tonight. And if it's not security, I can assess you for any other career. It's free. It's live on Zoom, and I'll do anything I can on these webinars to truly help. So maybe come to the webinar tonight or another webinar this week. Tyron from my team will definitely pop a link on how to do that. Enterprise architecture is critical for companies. Why is it not well known? There's almost no information or courses about it. Why is it so underrated? So Andy, it's not underrated and it's not unknown. It's just, it's an elite role. And, it's not like you're going to find an enterprise architect that's earning $500,000 a year that's going to want to disrespect themselves by creating a Udemy course. They're just not going to do it. So you can go to Penn State. They've got a great enterprise architecture program. It won't teach you what we do, but it's still fairly good. It's about $9,000. And it won't teach you all the executive skills. You'll have to learn them elsewhere. We include them. And it won't really teach you a lot of security and the networking and the data center and the cloud the way it would. You'll have to learn them outside that, but at least it's there. So it's not that it's unknown. It's just that the training for the C-suite is not what you're going to see talked about on social media all day. You're not going to talk about how to become a CEO on social media, because all of us that are CEOs, we don't have any time for that. There's no certification to be a CEO. It's a certain set of skills to know what it takes to lead a company, to make sure that people do what they need to make sure you constantly have a pipeline of revenue, to make sure you manage the expenses going out of the business, to make sure a strategy so when new competitors come in, you can compete against them effectively. So it's all that. So don't assume that anything good, there's going to be a lot of information on there. There isn't. There's not going to be a lot of public information on any of the best things because they're kept to a small subset of people. But there's lots of training on enterprise architecture. It's only out by a few people. Who writes about enterprise architecture? Harvard Business Press. I mean, you're not going to find it amongst the people that are already not at the top, that already don't know how to be at the top. So it's that. If you walk to Accenture, Deloitte, KPMG, Capgemini, PricewaterhouseCoopers, they've got armies of enterprise architects that are doing this kind of consulting. You walk into IBM, you walk into Cisco, you walk into Microsoft, you walk into HP. They've got armies of these enterprise architects that are doing things. You walk into any elite organization, they've got a dozen potential, 2 dozen, 3 dozen even enterprise architects that are working there. You work for a company like JP Morgan Chase, they have 2,000 AI people there, and that was years ago. So the key is just, it's not something people talk about. People think about the things that they've heard or they've seen with the certification. And quite frankly, people are often always obsessed by what they hear from a social media influencer that probably never had a job in their entire life that's giving guidance on what they think is cool. And look, I like solutions architecture. I like cloud architecture. I like network architecture. I like security architecture. I like them all. I've had my most fun in networking, security, and enterprise architecture, but they're all good. And there is training. It's select. And then again, think about every really good thing. It's selective. That's why there's not a surplus of us. Which is where I always like to be. And I'll show you what I mean by that real quick. See if I have one that I can demonstrate easily. So I always like to be, here we go. When I look at any role, I'll show you the best case scenario and I'll show you the worst case scenario roles out here. Here's the worst case scenario with software development. And this is a typical supply and demand curve. And I'll show you why I say software development is the worst place to be. Not that I don't love software developers, because they're two different things. So if we look in this position, we've got a given demand and we've got a supply. The closer we get this way, the higher supply. So the worst possible position is the software developer because of this. Everybody for the last 30 years has been told, learn to code. Whether they should or not, they were told, learn to code. Every person that ever studied something in high school or computers or college was told to learn the code. So you got a massive surplus of people that know how to learn the code. And it doesn't matter whether you do your coding in Cameroon, Cambodia, California, Chicago, Cape Town, or the Cayman Islands. But the cost of your employees are different. So software development competes globally, where certain jobs like architecture compete locally for the most part. You've got to visit your clients. So this is the worst place to be. Now let's look at this. And now all of a sudden you need to understand the inner workings of a business. You need to understand data centers. You need to understand cloud providers. You need to understand networking. You need to understand security. Now you need to be able to sell. You need to be able to lead. You need to be able to influence. You need to be able to manage or create a budget. You need to know how to manage stakeholders. You need to know how to manage the C-suite and the board. This is a high paid job. Whereas when we get into the surplus of people by changing the direction of the slope over here, now you're in a low paying job. So keep that in the back of your mind. All of the best jobs are like this. How often do you think of an electrophysiological cardiologist? Not a lot. And why am I saying that? So if someone gets too much going on, the electrical signals in the part of the heart that are not right, what they can do is they can figure out which part of the heart is bad, and they can use an electrical thing to burn that bad part of the heart off to stop people from dying of a lethal heart rhythm. Now, most people don't even know what an electrophysiologist is, let alone know they might earn double what a traditional cardiologist earns. They don't even know what it is. And that's the key. Once we start getting into the biggest and the best, most people don't know what a business architect is, let alone an enterprise architect. They don't know. Most people don't have a grasp of what management and strategy consultants do. And again, that's an architecture type role, more business architecture. Most people have no idea what people do on Wall Street either, and which jobs pay well. They have no idea. So that's the key. I've seen it. Why have I seen these roles? Why do I know which roles pay more? Well, because I've either had them, I've coached people for them, I've managed people that are in these roles, and I've made it. That's why I'm spending my time now to train the next generation of people. I've done it. I've had my success. I loved it. It was fun. But now it's for people, and I don't care whether it was Tyron, who was our student in Cape Town, who now works for us. It just doesn't matter to me. I don't care if it's Emmanuel in the UK. I just love watching people get great architect jobs. Would I say architects more than people in the medical field? Well, I'll tell you this. I earned triple my network. I earned triple as a network architect and an enterprise architect and a security architect that I did as an internal medicine nurse practitioner, which took 7 years of school and about $150,000 of education. So yes, we typically earn a lot more because of the rarity of our skills. I didn't say it was right. I didn't say it was fair. Medical people are historically underpaid for the amount of work they do, the amount of risk they take, and the amount of challenges they face. I still occasionally treat patients. I do it as a volunteer, though, and that way I can focus on my true love, which is architecture. And still, medicine is always a part of me. I'm constantly taking care of someone or helping someone with a specialty problem that many people can't figure out, because that's where I'd like to be. But architecture tech, it was my hobby. And I made a job out of my hobby. And that way for me, medicine was the greatest thing. Medicine was my great training grounds. It taught me how to ask their questions, to be fair. It taught me how to ask the questions. It taught me how to present information. I had to learn how to sell a patient, for example, into taking Coumadin when they didn't want to, when they needed it to prevent AFib-related stroke. So I will say medicine and architecture are the same job. When you work as a physician, a nurse practitioner, physician assistant, the patient comes in and says, "How's a chief complaint?" We say, "What brings you in today?" When I work as an architect, I'll go to the client and I say, "What are your goals?" Now, when I work in internal medicine, I ask some questions. Could you tell me about this? Could you tell me about this? Could you tell me about this? When I work as an architect, I ask questions. Could you tell me about this? Could you tell me about this? Could you tell me about this? When I work as a medical professional, I may order labs to give me more diagnostic information. And when I work as an architect, I might ask my architecture team, could you baseline these systems and get me this kind of information? When I work as a medical professional, after that, I create a diagnosis. When I work as an architect, I create an architecture, which is a treatment plan, if you will. So the job is the same. The only difference is, instead of prescribing medications, I'm prescribing a new business process or a new technology. Same job. And that's why most people can't learn architecture on their own, and they tend to be trained, because the job of the architect, the job of the attorney, the job of the physician, and also the job of the airplane pilot are those kind of places where you typically can't figure it out on your own. For example, you fly an airplane on your own and you crash that plane because you don't know how to fly. It's not a good day. A best case situation. Best case situation. You make a mistake in medicine, somebody dies. You make a mistake as an enterprise architect, 50,000 people could lose their jobs. So this is a world, it's just like medicine. It's ask a lot of questions. It's ask more questions. It's ask more questions. It's ask more questions. Analyze a whole lot of information and build a plan. I think it's the greatest job in the world, and I love it. And I've spent the last 25 years in it, and the last 2 decades, or actually over 2 decades, helping people get these roles because I think they're great. Great question. And you hit me with the medical thing, which is honestly such a fair question. And I think about it all the time. Thank you all for being here today. Please join me tonight if you can on the How to Become a Security Architect webinar. It's live on Zoom. You can ask any questions you want. We'll talk about what is a security architect, what does a security architect do, the skills to become a security architect, and it is live and free. So join us sign up for our free security fundamentals program. It'll be fun. I'll get to meet you. It's all free as well. And if you want to train with us and you want to become a full architect, a security architect, an enterprise architect, an AI architect, we've got 45% off sales for a fall savings that you can use. Tyron from my team will drop the link to that. Thank you so much. If you've had a good time, maybe give the video a like, maybe subscribe to our channel and hit the bell to be notified of new videos to assist you in your architecture career. Your security architect, your cloud architect, your AI architect, your enterprise architect career. This is Mike